The rain fell in sheets, drumming against the windshield of Daniel's old pickup truck. The wipers struggled to keep up, their rhythmic squeaking the only sound accompanying him on this desolate stretch of highway. He glanced at the crumpled map on the passenger seat, its edges frayed and stained with coffee. His brother's handwriting was barely legible in the margins. "If you're reading this, I found it. The road is real, Danny. I'll meet you there." Daniel's jaw tightened. It had been 6 months since his brother, Ethan, had vanished. The police had no leads, no clues, nothing. All they had was Ethan's abandoned car, found on the side of a remote highway, its engine cold and the keys still in the ignition. But Daniel knew better. Ethan wasn't the type to just disappear. He was a dreamer, a seeker of mysteries, and he'd been obsessed with the legend of the road that leads to nowhere. According to the stories, the road only appeared at night under a full moon, and only to those who were lost, not just in body but in spirit. It was said to lead to a place that didn't exist on any map, a place where the lost could find what they were searching for. But there was a catch. Once you entered, you might never leave. Daniel had dismissed it as folklore, the kind of tale Ethan loved to chase. But now, with his brother gone and no other leads, he had no choice but to follow the trail Ethan had left behind. The map, the notes, the cryptic messages, they all pointed to this night, this road. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. The full moon hung low in the sky, its pale light filtering through the rain. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel as he scanned the horizon. According to Ethan's notes, the road would appear just past the old oak tree, the one split down the middle by lightning. He'd driven this stretch a dozen times in the past week, but there had been no oak tree, no road. Tonight, though, felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. And then he saw it. The oak tree loomed ahead, its split trunk like a gnarled hand reaching for the sky. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he slowed the truck. Just beyond the tree, where there had been only empty fields before, a narrow road now stretched into the darkness. It was paved, but the asphalt was cracked and uneven, as if it hadn't been used in decades. The rain seemed to avoid it, the road dry despite the downpour. Daniel's heart pounded as he turned onto the road. The moment his tires touched the asphalt, the world around him seemed to shift. The rain stopped, the sound of the engine faded, and an eerie silence settled over everything. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead, but the edges were shrouded in mist. He couldn't see where it led. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "This is where Ethan went." The road stretched on, straight and unchanging, for what felt like miles. Daniel kept his eyes fixed ahead, his hands steady on the wheel. But as the minutes passed, he began to notice something strange. The road wasn't just leading him forward, it was changing. The cracks in the asphalt seemed to shift, forming patterns that almost looked like symbols. The mist thickened, curling around the truck like tendrils of smoke. And then, without warning, the road began to twist. It started with a gentle curve, but soon the turns grew sharper, the road winding like a snake through the darkness. Daniel's knuckles turned white as he fought to keep the truck on the road. The headlights flickered, and for a moment, he thought he saw something moving in the mist. A shadow, tall and thin, watching him from the edge of the road. "Just keep going," he muttered. "It's just your mind playing tricks." But the road had other plans. The twists grew tighter, the turns sharper, until Daniel was sure he was driving in circles. The mist closed in, reducing his visibility to mere feet. And then, just as he was about to give up, the road straightened again. The mist parted, revealing a signpost ahead. The words were faded, but he could just make them out. "Welcome to Black Hollow." Daniel's breath hitched. Black Hollow. The name was familiar. He'd seen it in Ethan's notes, scribbled in the margins of the map. But there was no town by that name on any map, no record of it ever existing. And yet, here it was. The road led into the town, the buildings rising out of the mist like ghosts. They were old, their facades crumbling, their windows dark. The streets were empty, the only sound the rumble of the truck's engine. Daniel slowed to a stop in the center of town, his eyes scanning the shadows. Something was wrong. The town felt alive, but not in the way a town should. The air was thick with something he couldn't name, something that made his skin crawl. And then he saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, their movements slow and deliberate. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and expressionless. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him, but their eyes were fixed on the truck. Daniel's heart raced as he realized what he was seeing. The inhabitants of Black Hollow, the ones who had vanished decades ago. They were waiting for him. Daniel's hand hovered over the gearshift, his instincts screaming at him to reverse, to get out of this place as fast as possible. But something held him back. The figures in the street didn't move toward him. They simply stood there, watching. Their faces were eerily still, their eyes hollow yet piercing, as if they could see straight through him. The town itself seemed to breathe, the mist curling around the buildings like a living thing. Black Hollow was frozen in time. The storefronts were adorned with faded signs advertising goods and services that hadn't been relevant in decades. A general store, a barbershop, a diner with a neon sign that flickered weakly. The buildings were weathered, their paint peeling and wood rotting, but they stood unnaturally intact as if held together by some unseen force. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, yet there was an undercurrent of something sweet, almost cloying, like the scent of flowers left too long in a sealed room. Daniel stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the cracked pavement. The moment his feet touched the ground, the figures in the street shifted, their heads tilting in unison as if they were puppets on strings. He froze, his heart pounding, but they didn't approach. Instead, they began to move away, drifting silently toward the center of town. One by one, they disappeared into the mist, leaving him alone in the empty street. "Ethan," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. He reached into the truck and grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam cutting through the gloom. The town was silent except for the faint creak of a rusted sign swinging in the wind. He began to walk, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The further he went, the more he noticed the details. The windows of the buildings were dark, but occasionally he caught a flicker of movement behind the glass, a face, a hand, a shadow that vanished as soon as he turned to look. The streets were lined with old-fashioned lampposts, their bulbs dim and flickering, casting long, wavering shadows. The mist seemed to thicken as he approached the center of town, where a large, crumbling clock tower loomed over the square. The clock was stuck at 11:59, its hands frozen just shy of midnight. Beneath it stood a figure, taller than the others, their back turned to him. Daniel's breath caught as the figure slowly turned to face him. It was a man dressed in a suit that looked like it had been tailored in another era. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, like the sound of stones grinding together. "This is a place for the lost." "I'm looking for my brother," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Ethan. He came here. Do you know where he is?" The man tilted his head, studying Daniel with an expression that was both curious and pitying. "Ethan," he repeated as if testing the name. "Yes, he was here. But he's gone now." "Gone?" Daniel's chest tightened. "What do you mean, gone? Where did he go?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised a bony hand and pointed toward the clock tower. "The road brought you here for a reason," he said. "But you must understand, this town is not what it seems. It exists outside of time, outside of the world, you know. Those who come here are searching for something, but not everyone finds it, and not everyone leaves." Daniel's grip tightened on the flashlight. "I'm not leaving without my brother." The man's lips curled into a faint, almost sad smile. "Then you'll need to find him before the road changes again. It won't wait for you." Before Daniel could respond, the man turned and walked away, his figure dissolving into the mist. Daniel stared after him, his mind racing. The road had brought him here, but it was clear that nothing in this town was straightforward. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to get them by standing in the square. He turned toward the clock tower, its face still frozen at 11:59. The building's doors were slightly ajar, the darkness within beckoning him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit by the faint glow of the clock's mechanisms, their gears turning slowly despite the frozen hands. The air was thick with the smell of oil and dust, and the floor creaked under his weight. As he moved deeper into the tower, he noticed something strange. The walls were covered in writing. Names, dates, messages, all scrawled in a chaotic jumble. Some were faded, others fresh, as if they had been written moments ago. He shone the flashlight on the wall, his breath catching as he recognized Ethan's handwriting. The message was brief but chilling. "Danny, if you're reading this, I found the truth. But it's not what I expected. The town, it's alive. It feeds on the lost. Don't trust the road. Don't trust the people. Find the well. It's the only way out." Daniel's heart raced as he read the words. The well. He had no idea what it meant, but it was the only clue he had. He turned to leave the tower, but as he did, the clock began to chime. The sound was deafening, each toll reverberating through the building and shaking the ground beneath his feet. The hands of the clock began to move, slowly at first, then faster, spinning wildly until they stopped at midnight. The moment they did, the world outside the tower changed. The mist thickened, swirling around the buildings like a living thing. The streets, once empty, were now filled with people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They moved with purpose, their faces blank, their eyes fixed on something in the distance. Daniel stepped out of the tower, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The town was no longer silent. It was alive with the sound of footsteps, whispers, and the faint hum of something unseen. And then he saw it. In the center of the square, where the man in the suit had stood, there was now a well. It was old, its stones cracked and moss-covered, but it radiated a strange energy. The townspeople were gathering around it, their movements slow and deliberate, as if drawn by some invisible force. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to stay away, but he knew this was what Ethan had meant. The well was the key. He had to reach it. As he stepped forward, the townspeople turned to face him, their hollow eyes locking onto his. They didn't speak, didn't move to stop him, but their presence was suffocating. He pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding, until he reached the well. The moment he touched the stones, the world around him seemed to shift. The mist cleared, the town faded, and he was standing on the road again. But it wasn't the same road. This one was darker, narrower, the trees on either side twisted and gnarled. The air was colder, the silence deeper. And at the end of the road, he saw a figure. It was Ethan. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the figure at the end of the road. It was Ethan, his brother, his twin, but something was wrong. Ethan stood unnaturally still, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the moon. His clothes were tattered, his face pale and gaunt, and his eyes were hollow, like the eyes of the townspeople in Black Hollow. "Ethan," Daniel called, his voice echoing down the road. He took a step forward, but the ground beneath him seemed to shift, the road twisting like a living thing. The trees on either side leaned inward, their branches clawing at the air as if trying to reach him. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, staring at Daniel with that empty gaze. Daniel's heart pounded as he took another step, then another, each one bringing him closer to his brother. But no matter how far he walked, Ethan remained just out of reach, the distance between them never closing. "Ethan, it's me," Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. "I've been looking for you. I came to bring you home." For a moment, Ethan's expression flickered, a shadow of recognition passing over his face. But then it was gone, replaced by that same hollow stare. He raised a hand, pointing behind Daniel. Daniel turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The road behind him was gone, replaced by a wall of mist that seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. The trees were closer now, their branches twisting and writhing like serpents. He could hear whispers in the mist, voices that were faint but growing louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't have come," Ethan said, his voice distant and echoing, as if it were coming from the bottom of a well. "This place, it doesn't let go." Daniel turned back to his brother, his chest tightening. "What are you talking about? We can leave together. Just come with me." Ethan shook his head slowly. "It's too late for me. The town. It's in my blood now. But you can still go. You have to go." "No!" Daniel shouted, his voice breaking. "I'm not leaving without you." He took a step forward, but the road beneath him buckled, the asphalt cracking and splitting. The mist surged around him, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. He could feel something pulling at him, tugging at his clothes, his skin, his mind. It was as if the road itself was trying to swallow him whole. Ethan's expression softened, a flicker of the brother Daniel knew shining through. "Danny," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you have to find the well. It's the only way out. But be careful. The town, it's alive. It's watching." Before Daniel could respond, the mist closed in, swallowing Ethan whole. Daniel lunged forward, but his hands grasped only empty air. The road twisted again, the trees closing in, and he stumbled, falling to his knees. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from all directions. "Find the well," Ethan's voice echoed in his mind. "Find the well." Daniel scrambled to his feet, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist. The road was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of twisted trees and crumbling buildings. He was back in Black Hollow, but it was different now. The town was alive, the buildings shifting and groaning as if they were breathing. The streets were filled with shadows, their shapes indistinct but menacing. He ran, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The well. He had to find the well. It was the only way out, the only way to save Ethan. But the town seemed determined to stop him. The streets twisted and turned, leading him in circles. The shadows followed, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. And then he saw it. The well stood in the center of the square, its stones glowing faintly in the moonlight. The townspeople were gathered around it, their hollow eyes fixed on him as he approached. They didn't move to stop him, but their presence was suffocating, their whispers filling his mind. Daniel reached the well, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge. The stones were cold, their surface slick with moss. He peered into the darkness below, but the bottom was impossible to see. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and he could feel something pulling at him, tugging at his mind. "This is the only way," he whispered to himself. "The only way to save Ethan." He took a deep breath and climbed onto the edge of the well. The townspeople watched in silence, their faces expressionless. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but he ignored them. He had to do this. For Ethan. And then he jumped. The fall was endless. Daniel plunged into the darkness, the cold air rushing past him as the whispers grew louder, more distorted. The well seemed to stretch infinitely, its walls slick and glistening with an otherworldly sheen. He couldn't see the bottom, couldn't tell if there even was one. All he could do was brace himself for the impact that never came. Instead, the world around him shifted. The darkness gave way to a dim, flickering light, and Daniel found himself standing in a cavernous space. The walls were made of the same cracked stone as the well, but they pulsed faintly as if alive. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. The whispers were still there, but they were different now, softer, almost mournful. In the center of the cavern stood Ethan. He was no longer the hollow, ghostly figure Daniel had seen on the road. This Ethan looked like himself again, his face full of color, his eyes bright and alive. But there was something off about him, something that made Daniel's skin crawl. Ethan was standing in front of a large, circular pool of water, its surface perfectly still and reflecting the faint light of the cavern. "Danny," Ethan said, his voice soft but echoing unnaturally. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel took a step forward, his heart pounding. "Ethan, I'm here to bring you home. Whatever this place is, whatever it's done to you, we can fix it. Just come with me." Ethan shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "You don't understand. This place, it's not just a town. It's a living thing. It feeds on the lost, on their memories, their regrets. Took me, Danny. It took me, and it won't let go." Daniel's chest tightened. "What are you talking about? We can fight it. We can leave together." Ethan gestured to the pool of water. "Look." Daniel hesitated, then stepped closer to the pool. The surface was like glass, perfectly still, but as he peered into it, images began to form. He saw himself, standing in the square of Black Hollow, surrounded by the townspeople. He saw Ethan, his face hollow and empty, watching from the shadows. And then he saw something else. A figure tall and gaunt, its face obscured by a swirling mist. It was the man in the suit, the one who had spoken to him in the square. "That's the heart of the town," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's the one that controls everything. It's the one that took me." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "Then we'll destroy it. We'll destroy this whole place if we have to." Ethan shook his head again. "You don't understand. The town, it's not just a place. It's a part of me now. If you destroy it, you destroy me." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "No, there has to be another way." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "There is, but it's not easy. The town feeds on memories, on regrets. It uses them to keep people here, to trap them. But if you can let go, if you can face your regrets, your fears, you can break free." Daniel stared at his brother, his mind racing. "What are you saying?" Ethan reached out, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I'm saying you have to let me go, Danny. You have to face your own regrets, your own fears. The town will try to stop you. It will try to trap you, just like it trapped me. But if you can face it, if you can let go, you can escape." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I can't leave you here." Ethan's grip tightened. "You have to. If you don't, the town will take you too. And then neither of us will ever leave." Daniel's chest heaved as he struggled to process what Ethan was saying. The thought of leaving his brother behind was unbearable, but the alternative, being trapped in this place forever, was even worse. He took a deep breath, his mind made up. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not leaving without a fight." Ethan smiled, a flicker of the brother Daniel knew shining through. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The cavern began to shake, the walls cracking and crumbling as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The pool of water rippled, the images distorting and twisting. The man in the suit appeared in the cavern, his figure towering over them, his face still obscured by the mist. "You cannot escape," the man said, his voice echoing with 1,000 others. "The town is eternal. The town is forever." Daniel stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We'll see about that." The man raised a hand and the cavern erupted into chaos. The walls closed in, the floor cracked and split, and the whispers became a deafening roar. Daniel and Ethan stood back to back, their determination unwavering. The fight for their freedom had begun. The cavern trembled violently, chunks of stone breaking free from the walls and crashing to the ground. The man in the suit, the heart of Black Hollow, loomed over them, his form shifting and distorting like smoke. His voice was a cacophony of whispers, each one a fragment of the lost souls who had been consumed by the town. "You cannot defy me," the figure intoned, his words reverberating through the cavern. "The town is eternal. The town is forever." Daniel clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He glanced at Ethan, who nodded grimly. They didn't need words. They had always been able to communicate without them, a bond forged in childhood that even this place couldn't break. "We're not afraid of you," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This town might have taken others, but it won't take us." The figure laughed, a sound that was both hollow and deafening. "You are already mine. Your regrets, your fears, they bind you to this place. You cannot escape what you carry within." Daniel's mind raced. Ethan had said the town fed on memories and regrets. If that was true, then the only way to fight back was to confront those things head-on. But how? The figure seemed to sense his thoughts, its form shifting to become more solid, more menacing. "You think you can resist?" it sneered. "You think you can outrun your own mind?" Before Daniel could respond, the figure lunged, its elongated fingers reaching for him. Daniel dodged, but the movement was too fast, too unnatural. The figure's hand grazed his arm, and instantly a flood of memories overwhelmed him. He was back in his childhood home, standing in the kitchen. Ethan was there, younger, laughing as he tried to flip a pancake and failed miserably. Their mother scolded him gently, her voice warm and familiar. Daniel felt a pang of longing, a deep ache for a time that was gone forever. The scene shifted. He was older now, standing in a hospital room. Ethan lay in the bed, his face pale and drawn. Their mother was gone, and the weight of her absence hung heavy in the air. Ethan looked at Daniel, his eyes filled with a quiet desperation. "Don't leave me," he whispered. The memory twisted again. Daniel was in his truck, driving away from Ethan's house after an argument. Ethan had been trying to tell him something important, but Daniel had been too angry to listen. He had driven off, leaving his brother standing alone in the driveway. That was the last time he had seen Ethan before he disappeared. Daniel gasped, stumbling back as the memories released him. The figure loomed over him, its hollow eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You see?" it said. "You are bound to this place by your regrets. You cannot escape them." Daniel's chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath. He looked at Ethan, who was watching him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "It's not just you," Ethan said quietly. "The town feeds on all of us. But you have to let go, Danny. You have to face it." Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. He turned back to the figure, his voice steady. "You're right. I have regrets. I have fears. But they don't define me, and they don't control me." The figure hesitated, its form flickering. "You cannot escape," it repeated, but its voice was less certain now. Daniel took a step forward, his eyes locked on the figure. "I'm not running anymore. I'm facing you, and I'm taking my brother with me." The cavern shook again, the walls cracking and crumbling as the figure let out a roar of fury. It lunged at Daniel, its form twisting and distorting, but Daniel stood his ground. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memories that had haunted him. The laughter in the kitchen, the hospital room, the argument in the driveway. He let himself feel the pain, the regret, the fear, and then, with a deep breath, he let it go. The figure's roar turned into a scream, its form dissolving into mist. The cavern began to collapse, the walls crumbling as the whispers faded into silence. Daniel opened his eyes to see Ethan standing beside him, a faint smile on his face. "You did it," Ethan said. "You faced it." Daniel reached out, gripping his brother's shoulder. "We did it. Now let's get out of here." The ground beneath them gave way, and they fell into darkness once more. The fall was brief this time. Daniel and Ethan landed on solid ground, the impact jarring but not painful. The darkness around them began to fade, replaced by the faint glow of moonlight. They were back on the road, the same road that had brought Daniel to Black Hollow. But it was different now. The twisted trees and suffocating mist were gone, replaced by an open, empty stretch of asphalt that stretched into the distance. Daniel stood, helping Ethan to his feet. His brother looked different, healthier, more alive. The hollow emptiness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a familiar spark of determination. But there was still a sadness there, a weight that hadn't been there before. "We're not out yet," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "The road will try to keep us here. It's not done with us." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. The road ahead was straight and clear, but he could feel something lurking at the edges of his awareness. Something watching, waiting. The town might have been behind them, but its influence wasn't entirely gone. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. Ethan took a deep breath. "We walk, and we don't look back." They started down the road, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows across the asphalt. The air was cool and still, but there was an undercurrent of tension, as if the road itself was holding its breath. As they walked, Daniel couldn't help but glance over his shoulder. The road behind them was empty, but he could feel something there, something just out of sight. He forced himself to focus on the path ahead, on Ethan walking beside him. "Do you remember when we were kids?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "That time we tried to build a treehouse in the backyard?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah. We didn't have the right tools, so it ended up looking like a pile of sticks. Mom made us take it down before it fell on someone." Ethan chuckled, the sound warm and familiar. "We were so proud of it, though. We thought it was the best thing ever." Daniel's chest tightened. "We were idiots." "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "But we were happy." They walked in silence for a while, the memories hanging in the air between them. Daniel could feel the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had lost. But he could also feel something else, a sense of closure, of resolution. They had faced the town, faced their regrets, and come out the other side. But the road wasn't done with them yet. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The road began to twist and turn, the asphalt cracking and splitting beneath their feet. Daniel could hear whispers again, faint but growing louder. He glanced at Ethan, who shook his head. "Don't listen to them," Ethan said. "They're not real." Daniel nodded, forcing himself to focus on the path ahead. But the whispers grew louder. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. But he kept walking, one step at a time. And then, suddenly, the road straightened. The whispers faded, the shadows receded, and the air grew warmer. The moon hung high in the sky, its light bright and clear. Ahead of them, Daniel could see something, a faint glow, like the first light of dawn. "We're almost there," Ethan said, his voice filled with relief. They quickened their pace, the glow growing brighter with every step. And then, without warning, the road ended. They stepped out of the darkness and into the light, the world around them shifting and changing. Daniel blinked, his eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. They were standing on the side of a familiar highway, the sun rising over the horizon. The road behind them was gone, replaced by an empty stretch of asphalt. The air was warm, the sounds of birds and distant traffic filling the silence. Daniel turned to Ethan, his chest heaving with relief. "We made it." Ethan smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "You made it." Daniel's heart sank. "What are you talking about? We're both here." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, Danny, I'm not really here. The town. It took too much of me. I can't leave, not completely." Daniel's chest tightened. No, that's not true. You're here. You're standing right in front of me." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I'm here, but not in the way you think. The town let me go, but it didn't let me go completely. I'm a part of it now, but that's okay. I'm at peace." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "No, I'm not leaving you. Not again." Ethan's smile was soft, filled with love and regret. "You're not leaving me, Danny. You're setting me free, and I'll always be with you in here." He tapped Daniel's chest, just over his heart. Daniel's breath hitched, his vision blurring with tears. He reached out, gripping Ethan's shoulder. "I don't want to say goodbye." "It's not goodbye," Ethan said. "It's just, see you later." And then, slowly, Ethan began to fade. His form grew lighter, more transparent, until he was little more than a shimmer in the air. Daniel reached out, but his hand passed through empty space. "I love you, Danny," Ethan's voice whispered, faint but clear. "Take care of yourself." And then he was gone. Daniel stood there, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. The sun rose higher in the sky, the world around him coming to life. He could hear the sound of cars passing by, of people starting their day. But for him, the world felt empty, silent. He took a deep breath, wiping the tears from his face. Ethan was gone, but he was right, it wasn't goodbye. Ethan would always be with him, in his memories, in his heart. Daniel turned and began to walk down the highway, the sun warm on his face. The road ahead was long, but he wasn't afraid. He had faced the darkness, faced his regrets, and come out the other side. And he knew that, no matter what lay ahead, he would never be alone. The road that led to nowhere had brought him home.